This man's name is Brad. He is the owner of a small company in America that focuses on fundraising for charity. That morning, while eating at a restaurant with his trusted employee, the employee suddenly tells Brad that he wants to resign. The employee explains that at his age now, he can make much more money than by working for Brad. He even says that maybe he can start his own fundraising company like Brad's, but become much more successful because he is still young. Hearing those words, Brad feels like he is slapped in the face. That night, he cannot sleep, thinking about the conversation from earlier. Brad remembers the time when he first starts building his business. He keeps thinking, why, after decades of running this business, is his life still not as successful as his friends? At that moment, Brad feels like a failure. All night, he keeps overthinking. He remembers the reunion, where all his close friends from college are already successful. Some are famous directors in Hollywood, some own big companies, some work in government and often appear on TV, and some have already retired and enjoy their investment income. When Brad compares his life now, he feels like a loser. He feels so jealous. But in reality, his family is not poor. His business, although small, stays stable. His wife's job is also good enough. He has a car, a decent house, and his children go to school without problems. He lacks nothing. But when he compares his life to his friends, that jealousy keeps coming back. The next day, Brad goes with his son, Troy, to the city of Boston to choose and register for college. At the airport, while waiting for their flight, the relationship between father and son feels distant. They just sit in silence. Brad then tries to talk to Troy so that his son feels proud. He says, "How about we exchange our economy class plane tickets for business class tickets?" Hearing that, Troy smiles happily because he has never flown in business class. But when checked, the ticket agent says that Brad's ticket cannot be exchanged because it is bought from a discount website. Brad feels disappointed and embarrassed. On the plane, Brad starts overthinking again. In his heart, he wonders, do my successful friends ever fly economy class like me? He remembers the reunion when his friends told stories about having private jets or at least always flying VIP class. Once again, Brad feels jealous. He then remembers his college days. Back then, he is a smart student with big ambitions to succeed. His wife is a simple woman who is always grateful for what they have. She never asks for more. But because of that, since they get married, Brad feels his ambition slowly fades away. Unlike his friends' wives, who are also ambitious and successful, Brad believes that one reason his friends become successful is the support from their wives. When they arrive in Boston, Brad immediately books a hotel to rest. That night, while having dinner at a restaurant, he asks Troy, "Which university do you want to apply to tomorrow?" Troy answers that he wants to apply to Harvard University, majoring in arts. His high school teacher once told him that with his piano skills, he is very qualified for Harvard. Plus, his favorite musician is now a professor there. Hearing that, Brad smiles proudly. He never knows that his son is so talented at playing piano. Back at the hotel, Brad keeps looking at Troy. He cannot believe that the child he has raised all these years now has such a bright future. He starts imagining the day his son graduates from Harvard and becomes a famous musician. At that moment, the jealousy in Brad's heart feels healed. The next day, Brad takes Troy to Harvard University for the interview. He patiently waits for the results. But soon after, Troy comes out and says that he got the schedule wrong. The interview was supposed to be yesterday, and now the registration is closed. Hearing that, Brad feels very disappointed. Outside the building, he keeps thinking about how to get Troy into Harvard. He calls his wife and asks if she knows any professors, alumni, or insiders who can help. His wife suggests asking Craig, Brad's old college friend who now works in the government. Hearing Craig's name, Brad falls silent. Back then, when Brad first starts his charity business, he asks Craig to be an investor. But Craig treats him with arrogance, making him feel small. Not only that, when Brad sends him messages just to stay in touch, Craig snubs him and never replies, as if Brad is not worth his time. After years of being ignored like that, Brad feels too embarrassed to ask Craig for help now. However, for his son's future, Brad swallows his pride. He calls one of his friends and asks for Craig's phone number. While making small talk, his friend starts showing off his successful life. He now lives in a big house in Hawaii with 2 beautiful girlfriends. The feeling of envy rises again in Brad's heart. But now is not the time to be jealous. After getting Craig's number, Brad immediately calls him. Unfortunately, Craig's phone is off. Brad leaves a voicemail asking Craig to call him back when he has time. The next morning, while having breakfast at the restaurant, Craig calls Brad. Brad explains the situation with Harvard and asks Craig for help so that his son can still apply. As an old friend, Craig agrees without hesitation. Not only that, Craig happens to have business in Boston the day after tomorrow, so he invites Brad to meet and have dinner at a restaurant. Hearing that Craig is willing to help, Brad feels very happy. He becomes 100% sure that his son will get into Harvard. He then takes Troy to the bookstore. While they are there, Craig calls again and says he manages to persuade Harvard to allow Troy to interview tomorrow. After hanging up, Brad immediately shares the good news with Troy. Seeing his son's happy expression, Brad feels joy too. He imagines Troy's future as a famous musician who will lift the family's status.
I bought an island. What? Yeah!
But just as he imagines this wonderful future, Brad's overthinking returns. He wonders, if Troy becomes successful one day, will he also look down on him, just like his old friends do? Even worse, what if in the future, Troy fails to become a famous musician and ends up as a street performer? Brad fears that his son's failure will make his friends look down on him even more. These thoughts spin around endlessly in his head. That night, Troy invites his father to meet his senior from high school, Ananya, who entered Harvard last year. Troy shares that he and Ananya used to be in the same orchestra team during a charity event. The three of them have dinner together at a restaurant. While talking, Brad feels amazed by Ananya's beauty and the bright aura that radiates from her face. In the middle of their conversation, Ananya's friend, Maya, arrives and joins them. Seeing these two beautiful, passionate women in front of him, Brad falls silent, mesmerized. He remembers the first time he meets his wife, who also has that same bright aura. Back then, she is full of passion, but after years of marriage, that passion seems to fade. Brad also remembers the friend he called yesterday to get Craig's number. That friend told him he now lives in a luxurious house in Hawaii with two beautiful girlfriends. Suddenly, Brad's wild imagination starts running. If he were successful and rich, he could also have two beautiful girlfriends like his friend. If he could choose, he would want his girlfriends to be like Ananya and Maya, not like his wife at home. After dinner, Ananya invites Brad to continue chatting at a bar across the street with her friends. Deep down, Brad really wants to go, but since Troy is underage and has an important interview tomorrow, Brad politely declines her offer. However, later that night, after Troy falls asleep at the hotel, Brad secretly goes to the bar to meet Ananya. There, they talk for hours. As he gets drunk, Brad begins to open up about his life, how miserable he feels compared to his successful friends. He hopes Ananya will encourage him like his friends' wives do, not like his own wife at home. But unexpectedly, Ananya shows no sympathy at all. Instead, she tells Brad that his life is already good enough. Out there, many people are far poorer, even struggling to eat. Many people who seem successful actually carry heavy problems. So there is no need to keep comparing yourself to other people's success. Life is not a competition. Hearing the young woman's words, Brad falls silent. Before they part ways, Ananya invites Brad to watch her orchestra concert tomorrow night. The next morning, Brad takes Troy to meet the Harvard professor who is also his idol for the interview. While waiting, Brad remembers to update his wife about Troy's situation. Soon after, when everything is done, Troy tells him that thanks to the insider his father contacts, he is welcomed warmly and feels confident that he will be accepted. Brad feels very happy. Finally, his proud son can study at a prestigious university. The two of them then go to register at Tufts University as a backup in case Troy's Harvard application fails. There, Brad tells Troy that Tufts University is where he used to study. While Troy walks around the campus, Brad stops by an office to greet his former advisor. But he is told that the professor has passed away. Brad feels shocked. Why does no one tell him? He feels his friends must avoid him because he is not as successful as they are, and they think he is not important. That night, back at the hotel, Brad prepares to meet Craig. When he arrives at the restaurant, the waiter only gives him a noisy table near the kitchen door. Soon after, Craig arrives. Seeing someone important like Craig, the waiter immediately greets him warmly, gives him a special table in the center, and even offers him a special drink. After the waiter leaves, the two old friends start talking, remembering the past. Brad also thanks Craig for helping Troy get into the most famous university in the world. Minute by minute, their conversation changes. They start talking about their other friends who are now successful. With arrogant laughter, Craig begins to reveal one by one the secrets of their old friends. It turns out that only Craig is truly successful. The other friends actually have serious problems. One almost goes to jail for tax fraud. Another has a very sick child who needs urgent surgery. Another fails in business investments and runs away to Hawaii. And the private jets they show off are not theirs, but company money they embezzle. Hearing all of this, Brad feels shocked and cannot believe it. In that moment, he keeps responding to Craig's stories, but his mind drifts away. He reflects that all this time, he believes his friends' lives are perfect because they are rich and successful. But now he realizes that is not the definition of a perfect life. Brad begins to think that Craig also must have a secret he hides. Suddenly, Brad feels like reality slaps him in the face. All this time, his life is actually good. Maybe he does not have as much money, but his family is happy. He has no debt. His son is healthy and well-mannered. His small business keeps running smoothly for decades and has many good connections. In that moment, Brad feels foolish. Just to appear successful, he forces everything to make his son enter Harvard, even asking help from an arrogant friend who once looked down on him. Until now, Craig never even apologizes. In the middle of the conversation, Brad's emotions explode. The respect he once has for Craig suddenly turns into anger. He pours out all his pain and frustration and leaves his friend behind. Back at the hotel, suddenly Troy says that he does not want to go to Harvard. While walking around campus that afternoon, he feels more comfortable studying at Tufts University. The professors are kind, the place feels nice, and the students are friendly. Troy then asks why his father seems anxious lately. Brad tells him all of his thoughts. He is afraid people will look down on him and call him a failure. Hearing this, Troy calmly says that he used to feel embarrassed too when he made mistakes in public, like slipping or forgetting to zip his pants. He used to think that everyone would always remember those mistakes, but in reality, they do not. Everyone is busy with their own lives. Troy hopes his father will stop worrying about other people's opinions. It is better to focus on the opinions of those who truly care, and the only person who really cares about Brad is Troy. Brad then asks Troy what he thinks of him. With a shy smile, Troy answers, "I love you, Dad." Hearing that, Brad smiles. As he lies in bed, Brad reflects. Why does he need to compare his life with others? Even though his life is simple, it is full of beauty. Now, Brad understands that life is not a competition. What he needs to do is enjoy and be grateful for every second of his life.